Revealingly, in his 1998 speech to the American Heart Association, Favaloro concluded that he is not privy to the truth. Therefore, his convictions about global government intervention to guarantee health care for all are nothing more than his sentiments. This honest confession acknowledges that his proposals are not rooted in objective reality according to the nature of men, but are the subjective wishes of his utopian fancy. In that speech to the American Heart Association, for readers with altruistic sympathies, Favaloro provided the following examples to consider from the UN's Human Development Report 1998. If you're an American woman, anchorman, or politician, give up your cosmetics and send the money care of the UN to fund the shortfall in basic education for all the world's inhabitants. If you are a European, surrender your ice cream money, and the UN can provide safe water and sanitation for those in need. If only the American and European women would redirect their spending on perfume, the UN could provide reproductive health for all needy women in the world. If the American and European pet owners would care for their fellow men's needs instead of the needs of their beasts, the UN would eliminate the basic health and nutrition deficits in the world. If you're Japanese and you eliminate your entertainment luxuries, the UN could pay for the unmet world need for basic health and nutrition, reproductive health for all women, and safe water and sanitation for all. Dearest hypocrite, you have succumbed to your base human nature, engaging in a trade of value for value with your fellow men absent the coercion of force, instead of questing for morality by surrendering value to guilt in exchange for nothing. Of course, your efforts alone will not be sufficient, so you will need to convince your family, friends, neighbors, acquaintances, and strangers to participate. Nevertheless, there will always be those misers that fail to see their duty as clearly as you. Therefore, you should use the coercive force of your government to take what is not given freely. You will need to make one other sacrifice of truth. You must ignore the fact that your sacrifices will go into the coffers of the third world kleptocracy, and an increased sacrifice will be required next year. If you cannot surrender those things that you value and demand the same of others to alleviate the need of that multitude of want, you should not consider yourself an altruist unless you feel guilty about your selfishness. Fortunately, gentle listeners, Favaloro had a suggestion to save you the inconvenience. The same UN report values the assets of the 225 wealthiest people in the world at over $1 trillion. Favaloro proposed a simple international tax of less than 4% on the wealth of these ultra-rich to pay for the needs cited above. Impatient, Favaloro had heard enough talk about the problems of poverty. It was time for action for the sake of improving the health of the poor. What moral principle is the basis for his simple solution? The rich have the money and they are few, while the poor have the need and are many. Why is the ultra-rich tax rate less than 4%? It is the need. How do you continue funding this program in future years? Somehow, the rich will provide the wealth for taxing. The rate will be set to match the need, and if necessary, the definition of the ultra-rich will be changed to include the listener. It is not an accident that this leading man in Argentina should be born into a wealthy society and die during a national financial crisis. As a mechanic, the doctor understood circulation, respiration, digestion, and all the other physical processes that maintain life. However, given his altruistic ethics, his understanding of the philosophical requirements of human life was deficient. Man, the rational animal, sustains his life with the product of his mind, not his muscle. Man's ability to turn his thoughts into tangible concretes, which he calls property, generates wealth. Man created money to denominate the value of his property for trade. When two men freely trade value for value without the coercion of force or fraud, intervention by a government created by men to protect his rights is violence. Such government action attacks man's sustenance and therefore his very life. Man's responsibility to his existence requires that he alone determine the use and distribution of his property based upon his objective values. Although a master can command a man's muscles to produce when enslaved by coercive force, man's mind cannot produce in that circumstance. because the mind responds to life, not the whip and chain. Dr. Favaloro and other altruists are philosophically anti-life. Favaloro protested for the indigent's right to live, but resolved to grant that right by taking the life from others who are less worthy than the poor because those others possess wealth. He claimed his end is virtuous, but he will submit others to any means necessary to achieve his ends. Under his plan, the government will take life from the haves and give life to the have-nots. Thus does government enslave first the few and then the many. Favaloro self-righteously planned to redistribute others' wealth based upon his aim of unselfishly benefiting the dispossessed. Not being naive, Favaloro planned an outright seizure of wealth, since altruistic designs must resort to force when the freely given sanction of the victim is not available. What virtue did Favaloro claim to justify his superior ability to distribute the wealth of others? Unlike the wealth holders, his thinking was unclouded by his own self-interest. However, that claim is false, given that his plan sought the fulfillment of his life's passion while subordinating the life passions of those who held the wealth. Altruism claims that an individual's life's purpose resides in unselfishly putting the concerns of others first. In practice, it results in the subordination of the self to the wishes of others in all matters by transferring the rights of property and life from the holder to anyone else with a claim of need. The highest virtue resides in individuals who sacrifice their greatest values for the sake of a stranger's need. The phrase, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, summarizes altruism. Who is to decide abilities and needs? Who is to enforce this creed? In a social environment, altruism uses peer pressure and guilt to extract the life from compliant individuals. In the political environment, the government decides using the politics of pull and enforces the creed with taxes, regulations, confiscation, courts, and jails. This abomination against man's nature twists an individual so his needs maximize and his abilities minimize as a means of self-preservation. On a societal level, altruism's consequences are stagnation, recession, depression, war, and finally the collapse of civilization. In Dr. Favaloro's corpse, we see altruism's consequences. At the University of La Plata more than 50 years ago, the curriculum taught him that he had a social commitment greater than himself to fulfill, just as public education teaches in the United States today. He pursued that social commitment with a passion, even with his tremendous abilities, and his giving all he had to the needs of others. His sacrifices were insufficient to meet the need. He went further and leveraged the politics of pull to sacrifice others' resources to the passion of his superior social commitment. His commitment, finding compatriot spirits over the decades, has created Argentina's current dilemma. Argentina suffers in recession, unable to seize the wealth needed to fund its social contract, and confronts a drain of ability seeking to emigrate. At the end of his personal and his country's resources, Dr. Favaloro sacrificed his last remaining value, his life, to the unmet need of others. Today, we mourn the death of an able man, Dr. Rene Favaloro. His flaws do not dilute his accomplishments in alleviating human suffering through increasingly effective methods for treating disease. However, ignoring his philosophical flaws cannot honor his life's legacy. Altruism is like a cancer whose unproductive cells consume sustenance to the detriment of the healthy cells and the living organism. When the doctor prescribes poison as a cure, the man who values life will refuse that treatment.